earliest times, human beings have sought to extend the reach of their communications, to inform and to influence, to connect communities, to bridge cultures, to seek and to gain knowledge. From earliest times, humans have leveraged technology to amplify their voice. From drum beats to Morse code, from radio to Wi-Fi, from scribes to presses to Twitter. The internet, the web, and now the next generation.
Founder and CEO of Anboto Group. Arrasti on danori. Bueno, lo primero de todo, voy a pediros un aplauso muy grande para toda esa gente que está ahí abajo, me emociono y todo, que está ahí abajo, gente de Microsoft, gente de HP, Chris Shipley, la considerada mujer más influyente de Silicon Valley, que está allí, ha venido aquí gratis a debatir el futuro de Internet, gente de Apple. Así que con esta gente que estamos trayendo todos y luego sumándole todos vosotros, que esto es impresionante, se te pone la piel de gallina, hemos hecho hoy que el Día Mundial de Internet, en el Día Mundial de Internet, hoy Bilbao sea la capital mundial de Internet. O sea que un aplauso para todos vosotros y para toda esa gente que está aquí. Bueno, y dicho esto, voy a presentar a la persona que viene después, a Tim. Voy a presentar a Sir Tim Berners-Lee de una manera que es como la veo yo. Es decir, es mi experiencia personal con la web. No es quizá la experiencia técnica, no voy a hablar de HTML ni de HTTP. Voy a hablar de lo que para mí supone la web y para lo que supone a muchos de vosotros. ¿Cuántos de aquí sois emprendedores o queréis serlo? No veo ni hostias. Decir, gritar. Bueno, pues para todos vosotros os quiero decir que Tim hace 20 años creó una plataforma que nos ha permitido desde nuestra propia casa o desde nuestro propio garaje, como suelen decir en Silicon Valley, jugar a ser grandes. Es una herramienta terriblemente democrática, muy meritocrática, en la que os digo eso, que nos ha permitido desde una empresa de Erandio saltar a Silicon Valley, dar que hablar y ser una de las empresas que están llamadas a ser las que hagan la siguiente revolución de Internet. Así que, como suelo decir yo, tiembla Google, que viene Anboto. Bueno, y siguiendo con mi presentación, esta plataforma democrática, meritocrática, es decir, nos igualiza a todos, ¿no? Nos pone a todos por igual, en términos de negocio, o sea, cualquiera desde su casa puede hacer negocio. Todo lo contrario a lo que he estado viendo. Mira, os voy a contar una anécdota que me ha pasado esta semana. Hoy mismo me han llamado, me dicen, oye, necesito una entrada VIP, con un asiento VIP. Y digo yo, VIP, very important person, persona muy importante. Y digo, vamos a ver, este tío que ni le conozco es muy importante para mí. Para mí muy importantes no son esta gente, no hay asientos VIP, y si los hay, son para mis amigos, mi familia, que quiero agradecer a mis amigos de Algorta que han venido, es la primera vez que me ven, y a toda mi familia, así para ellos también. Y ahora ya os dejo. I'm going to present the person that 20 years ago did the invention that changed the world. And he did the best contribution to humanity of the last 20 years. So let me present Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So clap your hands to receive the person who has changed the world. So Tim, it's all yours. Thank you very much. I'll see you later.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow an introduction by Xabier at the best of times, followed by, and when he's following dancers, it's even more difficult. It's great to be here, and it's, you know that we're here in parallel because there's this summit going on, but also the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the organization of all the companies that and people, individuals, and universities that are building the web. The World Wide Web Consortium is meeting here. It has been for the last few days in Bilbao, and I just want to say it's a really nice, great town to meet in. This building has been a fantastic one in which to meet. I must say, when we met, we didn't have stars in most of our rooms, but but it's been a great meeting place, and we've had a good meeting for the last 2 days. So, so I'd like to thank everybody in Bilbao, and in particular Xabier for bringing us here and making everything happen. So, the discussions we've had are about planning the future of the web, and in a way, because the web is something which becomes now so much an essential part of most of our daily lives, the daily lives of maybe 20% of people in the world, we really do have to think about what sort of a web we want. And that is partly a question of figuring out the technical details of how to make web pages even cooler, make them even more sophisticated. But a lot of it is the social questions about how can we use the web to make the world a better place. How can we make it a better meritocracy, if we want a meritocracy, a better democracy where we need a democracy. And so those questions, it's not just about, those are not just questions for technical experts in rooms, although there are plenty of questions for technical experts in rooms. But it's also really important, there are really important questions for everybody to think about, because governments at the moment are making a lot of important decisions about how much control who should have over the basic underlying internet, and how much, to what extent companies should be able to control it, to what extent different governments should be able to control it. There are a lot of decisions to be made politically about how we use the World Wide Web. So everybody needs to be aware of these things. So in this talk, I will talk a bit about the past, about looking back at the history, looking back from this just over 20 years since it all started, and I will also mainly look forward to the future. So, so going back to the 20 years ago, one of the problems, in fact, is that for a lot of people, I can't see you very well because of the lights, but a lot of you seem to be quite young. For a lot of you, you've grown up most of your lives, in fact, with the web. These 20 years for me have gone by very quickly. But if you go imagine back 20 years ago and think that the internet was actually invented 40 years ago. So what's the difference between the internet and the web anyway? The internet connects these computers. So 40 years ago, they connected up computers. They connected together the small networks to make them into one big interconnected inter-network. And they called it the internet. People like Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, Paul Mocker-Patrice invented the domain name service. And people who'd been running email systems within one computer system or within one company started to be able to use the internet for delivering it. So that was all existed. 20 years ago, back in 1989, that all existed. So I was working in CERN, the High Energy Physics Lab, where people came from all over the world. The internet was just starting to be used, and they had, to my mind, a huge problem that all the information about how the system worked was stored on computers, but stored on different computers, on different programs. So you could maybe connect through the internet or through some network from your computer to another computer, and then you'd have to learn how to use that program to find your information. And then when you found the information, maybe you'd be able to download it back to your computer, and maybe you wouldn't be able to use it because it was written with a different program. So I had the idea that I was just frustrated by that. So it was really frustration that the web did not exist. I felt it would be better if there were one virtual documentation system. And what I realized was really important was that all the people who had all these systems with their documents on them, they all had their own way of life. They all had their own favorite computer. They had their own favorite programs. And it was really important that I didn't disturb them. It was really important I didn't disturb them. I knew because I'd seen people who tried to say, we should all use one big documentation system. They say, we should all put all our documents onto this IBM mainframe. And then all the people who preferred the CTC mainframe would say, I'm not going to use it. All the people who used Macs or PCs wouldn't use it. So, and then somebody else would come along and say, the solution is we put all our systems on Macintosh servers, and then all the people from the mainframe wouldn't use it. So that what I realized what was really important about this system, that it should be an imaginary system. The World Wide Web is sort of like an imaginary program in which it has all this, but it uses the existing servers. And it's universal in that it makes no demands. It doesn't demand that you use a particular piece of hardware or a particular piece of software. It doesn't demand that you write your web pages using a particular editor. And in fact, it was designed so that you could follow links through HTML, but follow links to any sort of document. And in fact, it turned out that people ended up using HTML for lots of things. But this accessibility, the idea that any sort of information should be able to be put on it, was really important. So I didn't want to have one system which was just for beautifully published reports and a separate system for crazy ideas. I wanted you to be able to start a crazy idea, discuss it with people, and develop it until it became a beautiful design, and then became a report, maybe. Where it made the transition through the process of being designed collaboratively by lots of people working it together within the web. I wanted it to be able to stay in the same place with the same URL, the same thing that starts http://. So that if somebody linked to it at the beginning of the year, then they follow the link at the end of the year and they'd find the same thing. So the system has to be universal. Very important that it didn't distinguish between different sources of information. Very important also that it allowed people with disabilities to get the best use that they could out of the web. Very important that it was universal in the sense of international culture. It mustn't be a system which could only be used by people in Europe. So at CERN was very European, but also becoming more and more international. So for CERN's purposes. But anyway, I didn't want to have any line where the web get up to here, and after that, it was not web. Because when you make a link, it was really important that you could link to absolutely anything. And that was really difficult to explain to people. I could show them an initial web page, and so look, this is the web. Come and look. You see this thing I call a link, and you click on it, and you get another page. And you go, okay. So what's the big deal? You know? So the idea that that web page could be anywhere on the planet was very difficult to explain. And so that's where I was coming from 20 years ago. And that's where this idea, very important idea of universality came in very early on. Also, it was the idea that should be free of royalties was very important. I was going to ask all these different people to put their information on the web, and I could then to put it into one system and say, oh, also you have to pay me $2. That just wasn't going to work. They would have gone on, made their own systems so that they could go charging people $2. There would have been a whole lot of competition between all these different companies, and there would not have been one web. You would not have been able to make a link to anything you wanted to make it to. So that was 1989. I wrote a memo about it, and I never really got permission to really actually work on it officially. But a year later, a year and a half later, my boss, Mike Sendell, said, you know, Tim, you're really interested in buying that next computer. The next computer, I don't know, does anybody remember the black Next Cube? Who remembers the Next box? Did you have a Next computer you've seen? Yeah, they're very cool devices. Back then, they were 1990, this magnesium black cube had cool things on it. It had a system which allowed you to develop new applications very easily. So Mike said, hey, Tim, why don't you get back 2 of those Next boxes, and you'll need to test them out. So you'll need to develop some program. So why don't you develop that hypertext thing you were talking about? So he, with a sort of a wink, he left me to do the test of the machine, which involves, so I wrote the World Wide Web program. I sort of defined HTML in its initial, very simple version. I defined HTML, these URLs, things which start http://, etc. So HTML, the HTTP protocol, the hypertext transfer protocol, and you define. It was very simple those days, because I could just write the program, I could just write the specification, nobody looking over my shoulder. No big meetings like we have nowadays in the room next door about people who have a lot to say about which way you should go. Those were the days, and so that was fun, and I got the program written. I started in September of 1990. I wanted to get it finished pretty much by Christmas because we were expecting our first baby, which was much more important, on the 24th of December. So I got it more or less running then. And then since then, it's been a question of trying to persuade people that, that it's a good idea, that it wasn't going to be too complicated. So trying to just persuade people to put a browser on their machine, persuading people to start a new web server and put their data on it. And it was hard pushing. It was, I've never pushed a bobsled, but when I see on the television people pushing a bobsled, it looks as though it's really, really hard at first, and then it gets to a point where it goes off down the hill. And at that point, you really have to jump in and steer. And at a point with the web, when I had to jump in and steer, everybody wanted to know how they could join in and be part of the group, the community, enhancing the web. And so that's when we started the World Wide Web Consortium, with a base at MIT, one in the south of France, one at Keio University in Japan. And so now, and the Web Consortium now still has 3 bases in basically those 3 places. But now we have lots of offices. We have a very strong office in Gijón and just up the road, up around the Wiggly Road, in Spain, which has produced many things, including we have 23 member organizations in Spain, and at one point they even had a W3 consortium bus painted blue and white, which they drove around explaining to people about the web. So Spain has been very strong in the web, and also at that point, and also since then in many things. So that's the history, and that's how we got to here. Now it's if I'd imagined 20 years ago that it would be 20 years of effort and then I could put my feet up and sit back and just watch the web grow, then that was a wonderful idea, but it's not happened, because the web is growing, and the web technology is now being discussed by hundreds, thousands of people. HTML, which I wrote by myself, was later done by a working group, and that working group is now the biggest working group that the consortium has ever had. I've had a lot of discussions about it today. And HTML, which started off without really a number, but then HTML's 1 and 2 and 4.0 and 3.1 is now at HTML5. And HTML5 is now very much more than the original HTML, whereas originally it was just a markup language for a document. Now, because every document can be a program, every document is, ever since HTML became dynamic, now with JavaScript, it's a programming language, it's a computing platform. And so now it is the best bet for an interoperable computing platform. So now new applications are being developed as well, web applications. So that's a lot more specifications. And that's what's really exciting about HTML5, is that it is this open web platform. It's an open web platform which allows you to write an application run on every browser. And because it'll run on every browser, it'll run on every computer which has a browser, which is pretty much every computer, laptop computer now. It'll run on all the smartphones which have got browsers, which is more and more smartphones. And so, so this open web platform is a really exciting thing, and it may be more than we've been able to hope for years. Will allow people to write a program once and then have everybody out there be able to run that program without having to write it a second time for different machines. So web applications, in fact, are the sorts of things you could do with web applications are similar in some ways to the sorts of things you do with phone applications. And there's been a current craze for doing phone applications. But I'd point out to you that if suppose you're running a magazine and you realize that you need to be able to get to people on iPad, then you have two ways to go. You can make a specific application for that particular type of tablet. Or you can make a web application. And if you make a web application, it'll work on anything. And you'll be using these standards. So not only will it work on anything now, it'll probably work on the future things. Whereas if you write an application for a phone, you'll have to write it again for another phone. You have to write it for each operating system. It'll be a lot of trouble. When the next version of phones come out, you'll have to write it all over again. So we're really recommending people that if you're a developer and somebody comes to you and says, hey, will you write a phone app for us? You say, well, you sure you don't want a web app? Because a web app is much more cool. Web app is going to last, and I'll only have to write one. So that's an important, it's an important distinction, because if you write the web app, then it's on the web. If I'm looking through your magazine and I find something really interesting, I can bookmark it, and I can then email the bookmark. I can drag the URL into Twitter and tweet about it. It's part of the big global discussion. It's part of the discourse. If you put it in a phone app, and I'm looking at it on a phone, on a tablet, it doesn't have a URL. It's not part of the global discussion. It won't be found by search engines. You really want your magazine to be found by search engines. You really want people to tweet about it. You want people to discuss it. You want to be part of the big global community. So make it, put it on a web app, and advise everybody to. What we're doing now, what we've been talking about the last couple of days, among many other things, is making sure that when you build a web app, there will be all the power that you have, such as access to local data, the ability to work offline, for example, that you expect from application. That's one of the various things that are happening. It's easy to pick out the biggest things. There are actually, if you go to the w3.org site, lots and lots of things, and you could do that. w3.org, that's the consortium website. There are lots of things happening, so I can't tell you about all of them. I'll tell you about one other area, which I think is exciting. That it was in 2009, so that's 2 years ago. Looking at the web, I felt that it was doing really well when it came to masses of documents. It was really well when e-government was starting to really take off. There were lots of documents. There were lots of neat web applications along as well. There were people doing social networking and tweeting and having a lot of fun. But the data wasn't out there. There wasn't any data on the web. What do I mean by data? I mean that if you go to a website and you find out about something, say an opera happening in this hall, for example. You find out about the opera, and you have to type the details of it. You have to read it from the website and type it into your calendar. Well, maybe they will have exported the date as a calendar file. And if you export it as a calendar file, then it's easy. You click on it, and bing, it just appears in your calendar. Now, that's calendar data. So there is some calendar data on the web. But that was only calendar data. You need, if I have in my computer information about an opera that I'm going to see, I want to have information about who's singing, and I want to know who's conducting. And so I want information about people, and I want information about the building, and I want to know information about the town that the building's in, the rail services, and so on. So in fact, I want lots and lots of connected data. And if I'm actually looking at lots and lots of possible things I could do, I maybe want to pull them into a spreadsheet and put them there for the rest of the family and sort of to go over and choose. So I might want to pull in different information about all kinds of different things. And if you're used to, people who work with spreadsheets, you're used to being able to take data and mush it around and display it and analyze it. And you couldn't do that with most of the data out there on the web. And so I decided that I was going to spend 2009 telling people to put data on the web. We already had the standards. We have standards. There's lots of standards based on RDF. and Sparkle for the technical people, these standards which allow you to put data on the web, but they're sort of like RDF and Sparkle are for data what HTML is for a document. We had that, but people weren't doing it. So I decided in January that I would ask people to do that. In February, I got a chance to give a talk at TED, the conference in California, where you get 18 minutes to make your point. I tried to make that point. Then, a few weeks later, the then Prime Minister of England, Gordon Brown, asked me at lunch whether what the UK should do to make the best use of the internet. And I told him, oh, you should put your government data on the web. And he said, yes. I've never had somebody say yes like that. I've spent my life persuading people, pushing against the door, you know, and then you find the doors open. And so we had that was great. We had a very quick project for 6 months. Lots of people in the UK had always been enthusiastic about putting government data on the web and linking it together into what we call linked data. And so we had this. So we had a fast project, and at the same time, in the USA, there was a project to do that, and there was a nice competition between those two countries about who could get the government out there. And now we got some mapping data, which had not been public in the UK. We've got all kinds of things. One of the first things that people noticed was that somebody in government just released a little bit of data about cycling accidents. It just had the latitude and the longitude of each cycling accident each year. And this was just in just a spreadsheet file, and they released that. But in 2 days, somebody had taken that and made a mashup with a map. So that you could look at a map, look at London, for example, look at your cycle route into work and see where the accidents were, and so you could fix your route so that you could not die. So that was already a very valuable human benefit from what looked like boring data. It's turned into a mashup used by a user, and it's actually a benefit to humanity. And lots of great stories of the data that's been used. And now, since then, the government data has been growing. There's government data happening in lots of countries. And certainly France has joined in, and I understand even locally here that you've got lots of open data projects, including linked data projects. So that's, and of course what's great about it is when you do it in Spain, then you do it you put the data out there, and it doesn't just help Spain, but it allows you, the value of that data is added to by the fact that there's comparable data in other countries. So instead of just looking at the results, instead of just looking at the amount you're spending on, for example, foreign aid, then you can compare with what all the other countries are spending on foreign aid. And that's very valuable. And the data that you publish will be used by children doing projects from Spain in America. They will be able to use that data. So the economic benefit of the data is huge. So, in fact, I developed a star system, which I give people a varying number of stars, depending on how if you put the data on if you've managed to get the data away from the person who's been hugging it, who didn't want to give it away, then what Francesco calls the data hugging disease, data hugging syndrome is that he calls it. Very difficult sometimes to get somebody to release control of the data. But if you have released control of it, or you've persuaded somebody to release control of it, then you get one big star, even if it's in a terrible format, even if you've just faxed it to someone and put the picture of the fax up there. Okay, but then you get 1 star for that, but you get 2 stars if it's in a machine-readable format. You get a third one if it's in a third star if it's in a open standard, not a proprietary format, but an open standard format, XML, CSV, RDF. Well, RDF actually is a very special format because it allows you to link it. It allows you to connect data that you've got about Bilbao to data that other people have about Bilbao. connects the concept. So that RDF allows it, it makes it linkable, and you get the 5th star if you've actually linked it to other people's data. So that's the 5-star system, and I strongly encourage you to go and find data out there which you think should be out there, and encourage people to make it to get it out there. And every time when you see somebody with no stars, encourage them to get the 1st star. If you see somebody with 3 stars, encourage them to get the 4th star, and so on. Every extra star gets extra benefit for the world. Of course, when people talk about putting data on the web, sometimes the reaction is, oh dear, what about privacy? What about the fact that people, what about all this, the worries about personal data being on the web? Now, privacy is a huge and very big issue, actually, and the W3C has had a lot of workshops about it. We have a lot of discussions about it, and in fact, we need a lot of thought about building systems which respect privacy. But when you're putting data on the web, the thing to do is you look at the huge amount of data which is not personally identifiable. Look for the data about the forests, look for the data about the rivers, about the potholes in the road, all this data which does not have personally, which is not about individual people, and put that on the web. And and pick your battles, pick the effort that you're going to put in, put it into those things where you don't have those issues. So it's a hard. One of the things that W3C does, it doesn't just roll out specifications like a sausage machine. It's a place to meet. We've been meeting, and so the important thing is to bring everybody together who thinks it's important. So do get involved with W3C if you're interested in privacy, if you're interested in it from the social side, from the policy side, from the technical side. Then W3C is a place where we have brought all the relevant types of people together to talk about it. That's how W3C, how it works, and what it is. So, stepping back a bit, I'll just I'll talk about a couple of things. The first one is that as you look at all the things that we're doing to make technology fancier, you realize a lot of people in the audience here are going to be early adopters. You're the people who have maybe 2 smartphones. You're the people who download a program because it seems fun and exciting. And you're the people who discover about social networking first. So we've got all these people, and the people who are designing these programs they're the same group of people. They're people in developed countries, and they're developing these things for their own needs. And when you look at this process and you realize that now it's got to the point that 20% of the people in the world are using the web, then you think, wow, cool, 20%. But now suddenly something happens which didn't happen before when it was only 0.2%. Now when it's 20%, you think, what about the other 80%? Because suddenly you've got a big chunk of the world whose lives work more efficiently, who have different ways of finding out about healthcare, have different ways of finding a job, have different ways of paying their taxes. And the other 80% don't. So the other 80% who do not use the web, even if they have a phone, if they don't use the web, they're not really part of the information society. So just 18 months ago, 2 years ago, looking at that, we decided to create a new web foundation, Worldwide Web Foundation. And the Web Foundation is looking at the fact that the web should actually serve humanity. And that comes from a feeling that when you look at the difference between what it's like to be in the 20% and what it's like to be in the 80%, you realize that it's huge. It's a huge benefit. It's a huge, if you like, it's a difference. When you had, before in that between the developed world and the undeveloped world, there was water and healthcare and income and various things. But now the internet has made that gap even larger. And in fact, some of the other pieces of the gap, it's easier to fix. If you can get somebody internet connectivity, it's easier to get them a job, so it's easier to get them money, so it's easier to get them the money to buy a pipe which will give them water. So in fact, internet and water and healthcare are all connected together. And internet is different from water because if water and vaccines are physical things. If you get some water in a pipe, you have a choice. You either drink it or you give it to somebody else. If you get information from a pipe, then you can, the moment you know it, you can tell everybody, and you'll know poorer. So information spreads very, very efficiently. And so once you have an information infrastructure, then you can do things. You can do things in disasters. You can do things when a new disease spreads through banana plants. You can get that information through. So the Web Foundation is working with lots of other organizations to try to think, what is the thing we could do which will accelerate people getting from where they are now to being members of the information society as quickly as possible? What's the one thing we can do in this region what's the one idea we have to introduce which will get people there in 5 years instead of in 15 years? Or in 2 years instead of in 5 years? How can we accelerate it? What's the idea? And it's very much a question of getting across ideas. So, for example, the Web Foundation has been teaching entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa how to build little websites which work on mobile phones so that they can build a web-based industry around the people in those countries who have got maybe a mobile phone with a web browser themselves, or maybe a mobile phone with a web browser in the village somewhere. So the Web Foundation, it works, obviously connects to W3C. W3C is advancing the new technology. Web Foundation is looking at making at the fact that ability to use the web now becomes a human right. So, when you look at that goal, that the web should serve humanity, what would we like it to be? I think it's important we have conferences like this where we all discuss what it should be. I think that over the last 20 years, that has changed quite a lot. New things have been possible. But in a way, if I go back to what I originally wanted to do, back at CERN, 1989 in Geneva in Switzerland, and I think of what the idea was then, what I wanted to do then was I wanted people to be able to work together. I was involved in various software projects. The web was one of them. These software projects were done by people in different countries. So I had people in quite different countries, not at CERN, working on them. I needed them to be able to join in, figure out what was going on, join in a common design process, designing the system, contribute their bit of program, their bit of design, and then leave without having to be debriefed, without having to explain what they'd done to everybody, because what they'd done is obvious, because every thought they'd had, any idea, was all sewn into the web. So the idea was it should be very much like a sandbox. It should be very much somewhere where everybody plays and they build stuff together. And I wanted it really to use these links so you could understand why things happened. And I had this idea back then that we should use it for group creativity. I called it intercreativity back then, because people said the web is great because it's interactive. But then the interactive sites, they just, interactive meant you could press a button to select which movie you wanted. Okay, that's not really creative. So I started talking about intercreativity. And intercreativity, if you like, comes back to this fundamental question. What happens when we have we're all trying to solve some big problem. And I've got a little bit of the solution in my head. But if I have two pieces of the solution in my head, if I have all the pieces of the head, then what happens is really magical. It's human creativity. I think about it, I talk to people about it, and then one moment, as I'm wandering along, I realize that the pieces are starting to fit together. And it happens subconsciously, but after a while I sit down in front of a piece of paper and I put it together, and my mind has fitted together all the little pieces of the puzzle. By inventing the web was like that. It took a while, but all the pieces that I do of design, which I've used on previous projects, I've fitted together into the design of the World Wide Web. And so what happens now if we've got another problem, maybe a big one, like AIDS, understanding AIDS, understanding brain disease like Alzheimer's, trying to understand climate change, understand what we should do for climate change. Now, I have maybe one piece of the puzzle in my head, and you're somewhere else, and you have another piece of the puzzle, and somebody else has a... So all these half ideas, all these half-formed suggestions from different people's brains, how can we make the web the medium that allows all these half-formed ideas to come together? Because the problems that we have now are much too big. The problems that we have now are much too big to have one person absorbing everything, sitting in front of a computer terminal and learning everything that everybody else knows. Now we have to have, the knowledge is stored in the web. The knowledge is too much for one person. The ideas have to be shared. So there is this goal of the web being a really powerful collaborative tool. And in fact, the interactive web, the sort of exciting web applications web, is part of, excuse me, is part of that. But also, the web of data is part of that. Because the web of data, in fact, contains the knowledge, the machine processable knowledge, which we and machines together. So we have this goal of a web of knowledge in lots of different media, including very well-defined data, and including crazy ideas, and maybe some poetry, people expressing in very artistic ways the particular yearnings that they have. And that mass of humanity connected by technology, connected by knowledge, connected by the record, connected by everything that we've ever written or filmed, somehow will be much more powerful, and it will allow us to go into the next century and solve the problems that we could never have solved before. Thank you.
Just one second. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you like it.
This is an amazing hall.
This is amazing.
Yes, there are amazing people out here. I can't see them very much.
Yeah, we can see the people. So, let's do one thing. Now, we have a present for you. I want to do one thing. Let's try. Vamos a hacer una cosa. Vamos a hacerle un regalo. Ahora las estrellas no van a ser las que están aquí. Vais a ser vosotros. Entonces, es una cosa que siempre he querido hacer. Por favor, coger el móvil, take your mobile phone, switch on the line, switch off this light, subir los fotógrafos y vamos a ver si podemos hacer un cielo de estrellas con los móviles de cada uno. iPad, móviles, todo. Por favor, subir aquí los fotógrafos, las cámaras y vamos a darle este regalo, this present for you, of all the people.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's awesome.
Look at that.
Impresionante. Joder, esto es impresionante.
Wow.
Saca esto.
That is incredible. All right. Wow.
So, Matt.
Okay. Thank you.